3 years together. My friends started asking questions around month 8, though at the time I didn't recognize them as questions so much as observations I needed to explain. Why does he always show up late? Sarah asked after he arrived 40 minutes into my birthday dinner. Why doesn't he text you back? My roommate would say when she'd see me checking my phone throughout the evening, waiting for a response that wouldn't come until the next morning. I had answers for everything, ready and immediate, like I'd been preparing for these questions without realizing it. He's busy, I'd say. He's stressed with work. He's not good with his phone, some people just aren't, and that's okay, right? I genuinely believed I was being understanding, the kind of girlfriend who didn't make demands or create drama over small things. I thought I was mature, evolved, not needy like other girlfriends I'd seen who wanted constant communication and attention. I prided myself on being low maintenance, on not requiring much, on being easy to be with, because I understood that people have their own lives and their own struggles. When my mom would gently suggest that maybe he should make more effort, I'd defend him before she could even finish her sentence. You don't understand how demanding his job is, I'd tell her. He's building a career, and that takes focus and time. I believed every word I said. I wasn't lying to her or to my friends or even to myself, at least not consciously. I thought I was simply seeing the situation clearly, with nuance and understanding, while everyone else was being judgmental and expecting too much. The questions kept coming, though, from different people at different times, and I kept having answers. Each time someone pointed out something, that he'd forgotten to ask about my presentation, that he'd bailed on meeting my family again, that he never seemed to prioritize our plans, I had an explanation that made it make sense. And the more I explained, the more I convinced myself that I was right and everyone else just didn't understand our relationship, didn't see what I saw, didn't know him the way I did. The excuses became more elaborate as his behaviors got worse, though I didn't see it that way at the time. What I saw was that I was getting better at understanding him, at interpreting his actions through the lens of who he was and what he was dealing with. He'd leave me on read for 6 hours while posting Instagram stories throughout the day. I could see he was active, see him responding to other people's posts, commenting on his friends' pictures, clearly on his phone and clearly available. But I told myself and anyone who asked that he was just bad at multitasking, that being on social media was mindless scrolling, but responding to texts required actual mental energy he didn't have. He canceled our anniversary dinner the day of because something came up at work. An urgent meeting, a crisis that needed his attention, something his boss required immediately. I sat in the restaurant by myself for 20 minutes, dressed up, makeup done, before I finally accepted he wasn't coming and left. When I told my friends about it later, I framed it as a testament to his ambition. He's building our future, I said, as if canceling our anniversary was an investment in our relationship rather than a disregard for it. I actually believed that. I thought his career success would eventually benefit both of us, so sacrificing our present together was just practical planning. When we'd have conversations about plans, about feelings, about things that mattered to me, he'd forget them entirely. I'd mention something important, something I'd been thinking about or worried about, and a week later, he'd have no memory of the conversation ever happening. At first, I thought maybe I hadn't been clear enough. Maybe I'd been too vague or too subtle. So I started being more direct, more explicit, practically outlining my points. But he'd still forget. And I'd tell myself he just had a lot on his mind, that his brain was full of work stuff and life stress, that it wasn't personal. My mom asked why he didn't come to family dinner again. It was the 3rd time he'd skipped, each time with a different reason that I'd relayed to her with complete conviction. This time I said he was tired, that he'd had a brutal week and needed to rest. I could hear the skepticism in her silence, that particular quiet that meant she was choosing not to say what she was thinking. But I filled that silence with more explanations, more context, more reasons why his absence was completely understandable and not something anyone should be concerned about. When my best friend pointed out that he hadn't asked about my promotion, the one I'd worked toward for 2 years, the one I'd told him about when I first applied, the one I'd been nervous about and excited about and had finally gotten, I immediately said he showed support in other ways. She asked what ways. I paused, searching for examples, specific instances of him being supportive that I could point to. I couldn't think of any in that moment, but I said it anyway, said he showed support in other ways, as if saying it made it true, as if the confidence in my voice would compensate for the complete absence of evidence. I'd plan dates, spend time thinking about what we could do together, what he might enjoy, where we could go. I'd research restaurants, buy tickets to things, make reservations. He'd show up, usually late, and be completely distracted the entire time. On his phone, responding to work emails, checking texts, scrolling through something that clearly held more interest than our conversation. I'd try to engage him, ask about his day, share things about mine, and he'd give minimal responses while his attention stayed on the screen in his hand. I'd try to have serious conversations about us, about our relationship, about things I was feeling or noticing. He'd listen for maybe a minute before saying, "Can we do this later?" in a tone that suggested the conversation itself was the problem, not whatever issue I was trying to address. Later never came. I'd wait for him to bring it up again, to circle back to what I'd started to say, but he never did. And eventually I stopped bringing things up at all, because what was the point of starting conversations that would never be finished? I started keeping my problems to myself because sharing them felt like burdening him with things he didn't have the capacity to handle. When something went wrong at work, when I was stressed about money, when I was worried about my mom's health, I'd just handle it alone. Not because he told me not to share, he never explicitly said that, but because his reactions made it clear that my problems were an inconvenience, a weight he didn't want to carry, an expectation he couldn't meet. I celebrated my wins alone too. When I got the promotion, I texted him. He responded with nice, followed by a thumbs up emoji. No questions about what the new role involved, no interest in how I was feeling about it, no suggestion that we celebrate. The next day at work, I got flowers from my team, cards from colleagues, genuine excitement, and congratulations from people who barely knew me. And from the person who was supposed to know me best? Just nice and congrats, with no follow-up questions, no real engagement, nothing that suggested he cared beyond the bare minimum acknowledgement. Somewhere in the third year, I started noticing the gap between what I was saying about him and what I was actually experiencing with him. I'd tell people he was supportive and then spend evenings alone dealing with things he never asked about. I'd say he was just busy and then watch him scroll through his phone for hours. I'd explain that he showed love differently and then feel nothing that resembled love in how he treated me. The excuses I gave others started sounding hollow even to me, but I kept giving them because stopping would mean acknowledging something I wasn't ready to see. Each time I defended him, I'd feel this slight hesitation, this small voice asking if what I was saying was actually true or just what I needed to believe. I'd push that voice down, ignore it, speak over it with more conviction, more certainty, more elaborate explanations that could drown out the doubt. I'd catch myself thinking about how I'd explain his latest absence, his latest forgotten conversation, his latest late arrival before it even happened. I was pre-writing the narrative, preparing the justification, crafting the story that would make his behavior acceptable. That's when I started to realize, on some level I knew I couldn't fully admit yet, that if I constantly had to explain someone's behavior, maybe the behavior was the problem, not everyone else's understanding of it. But I wasn't ready to stop yet. The excuses had become automatic, reflexive, part of how I understood our relationship and my role in it. I was the understanding girlfriend, the one who made it work despite the challenges, the one who saw the best in him when others couldn't. That identity felt important, felt like it meant something about who I was as a person. Letting go of it would mean letting go of how I'd been defining myself for 3 years. There was a work event I'd been looking forward to, one of those networking things where you bring a +1 and introduce people and make connections. I'd asked him to come, told him it was important to me. He said yes. The night of the event, he texted an hour before that he couldn't make it. Something came up. I went alone, which I'd gotten used to, and spent the evening making small talk with colleagues and their partners. A colleague I'd worked with for years asked, "So, what does your boyfriend do?" And I opened my mouth to answer. I'd been talking about my job for 10 minutes, excited and engaged, sharing details about projects and challenges and wins. And suddenly I realized I didn't know how to describe him anymore. Not because I didn't know his job title or his company, I knew those facts. But I didn't know who he was to me anymore. I couldn't describe our relationship in any way that felt honest. I couldn't say he was supportive because he wasn't. I couldn't say he was my partner because partners show up. So I said something vague about his career and changed the subject, and that's when it hit me. I'd spent 3 years making excuses for someone I couldn't even describe to a stranger. 3 years crafting elaborate explanations for behavior that needed no explanation if it had been acceptable. 3 years defending someone who'd never defended me, understanding someone who'd never tried to understand me, prioritizing someone who'd consistently shown I wasn't a priority. The excuses hadn't been protecting him. They'd been protecting me from seeing what was actually there or wasn't there. From acknowledging that I'd normalized being treated like an option, like an afterthought, like someone whose feelings and needs and presence didn't really matter. I'd called it being understanding when it was actually just accepting the unacceptable. I'd called it being mature when it was actually just being small.
I couldn't remember the last time being with him had felt good. Not just okay or fine or manageable, but actually good. Couldn't remember the last time I'd felt valued or seen or chosen. All I could remember was explaining, justifying, making excuses, shrinking my expectations down to nothing and still somehow being disappointed. And I was tired. Not angry, just tired. Tired of being my own defense attorney for a relationship that had stopped defending itself years ago. If you found yourself constantly explaining someone's behavior, making elaborate excuses for things that shouldn't need excusing, you're not wrong for finally recognizing what you've been normalizing. Others have shared their own moments of realizing they'd become their own defense attorney in the comments. Sometimes that shared recognition is what helps. If this feels familiar, you're welcome to stay.